Over the last 10 years operating a tackle shop, I've spooled thousands of reels with braid and mono. I'm going to show you the proper way to spool your reel and explain all the mistakes you need to avoid. Let's dive in. Step 1 is to check the line lay on your reel before you remove your old line and respool your reel. You want to make sure that your line is evenly laying on the spool of your reel. So this reel, for example, you'll notice there's more line at the top of the spool than there is at the bottom of the spool. What this means is that we need to add a couple of washers to make sure the line evens out when we re-spool. You want to do this before you put your new line on. But if you've got more line at the bottom of your spool and less at the top, that means you've got too many washers on there and you might need to remove 1 or 2. Now, when you buy a new reel, inside the box, you'll find a packet of these washers. Now, the problem is they're not all the same for every reel. So, for example, this is a packet of washers from a 5000 Shimano Ultegra. This is a packet of washers from a 5000 Shimano Vanford. And then this is a packet of washers from a 5000 Daiwa TD Soul. What you'll notice is all three of these are completely different. They're different sizes, and then the hole in the center is different shape and different size. So they're not compatible with just any reel. That's why it's really important when you buy a new reel not to throw away the box and keep the washers. Now for this reel, since it's got more line at the top of the spool and less at the bottom of the spool, that means I need to add 2 washers because of how severe the difference is. Now to add or remove washers, you just need to remove your drag cap so that you can take off your spool. Now if you look at the shaft of the spool, you'll see these little black washers. Now I can't actually find the washers that fit this reel, so I'm going to have to show you on a different reel, but that's exactly why you got to make sure you keep the box every time you buy a new reel so you don't lose those washers. Okay, so here's a 5000 size Shimano Ultegra. Same thing, turn the drag knob counterclockwise until you can take the spool off. Once you get the spool off, you can see the washers on the shaft, which are these black little round washers here. If you want to put one on, you got to make sure it's the right one for the reel. Otherwise, the shape of the hole in the center won't match the shape of the shaft and you won't be able to get it on. So to put a washer on, you just line up the hole in the center of the washer with the shaft so that it matches like this. And then you just want to push it on until you can get it all the way to the bottom and get it to sit right above all the washers that were already on there. Once it's sitting right above them, you're pretty much good to go. And if you need to remove a washer, you literally just take one off. Now, once you've removed your old line, or if it's a new reel and you're spooling it for the first time, the next step is to take a look at your spool. If you're using mono, this part won't matter too much. But if you're using braid, this part is really, really important. If your spool has a smooth surface like this, it means that you're going to have to use a mono backing. But don't worry, I'm going to be showing you how to spool both mono and braid, regardless of the type of spool you've got. Now, if your spool has grooves in it all along the spool or has a rubber strip in the center, that means that your spool is braid ready and you won't need the backing. I'll show you the proper knot you use to connect braid directly to your spool. Now, the next step is to make sure you've got enough line to actually fill your reel. If you look at the information on the spool of your reel, it gives you guidelines of how much line it should fit of a specific diameter. Once you're sure you've got enough line to actually fill your reel, we're going to now connect your line to the spool of your reel so we can actually spool it. Now, if you've got a braid ready reel and you're going to spool it with braid, the knot you use to tie the braid directly to the spool without it slipping is basically a uni knot. So you fold your line to create a loop, and then using the tag, you make another loop, hold the top of that loop in line with the main line. So basically hold the top of the loop next to the main line, and then you want to wrap the tag around both lines and through that loop 5 or 6 times to make sure it doesn't slip. Right, now, once you've done that, you want to pull on the tag end to form the knot like this. And then you should have a loop that's about 5 or 6 inches long. So now, you want to feed the line through your stripper guide or the guide that's closest to your reel. Then you want to make sure that you open the bail arm. Otherwise, when you try to wind the line back on, nothing's going to happen. So you make sure your bail arm's open. Then you want to grab your loop, put it around the spool like so. And then you want to wrap that loop around the spool 4 or 5 times. So there's 3. See, you'll notice now it's a little bit tight. If you pull on the loop, it'll get bigger. That's the best part about using the uni knot for this. So then you go, that's 4. We'll do one more just for demonstration. That's the 5th one. Now, if you pull on the main line, it'll tighten the knot against the spool. Now, once the knot is nice and tight against the spool, if you take a look, the line does not slip at all. Not only does the line grip to the grooves on the spool, the loops also grip to each other. So you get 0 slippage. Your line will never slip like this. That's why if your spool is braid ready, you don't need any backing as long as you're using this type of knot. So now, you just want to cut your tag end off. I will show you how to spool mono after we've done the braid. So we just cut our tag end off like so. And then again, make sure that your line is running under the roller bearing on your reel, which is why we open the bail arm before we wrap the line around the spool. Okay, now we're ready to wind it on. Now, when it comes to winding on your braid, the most important thing is having tension. Lack of tension is your worst enemy when it comes to braid. It causes wind knots and it causes the braid to bite into itself. Really important to get the tension right. Now, normally when I'm spooling reels, I use a line spooler since I've got one in the shop. But obviously, you guys most likely won't have one of these. So I'm going to show you the proper way to spool your reel without it. Now, believe it or not, the best way to get good tension on braid without a line spooler is going to be using either baby wipes or some sort of wet wipe. So, you want to grab one, fold it in half, like so. Then, you want to put the braid in the center, fold it over your braid, like this. Now, what this allows you to do is weave it between your fingers, like this. And now when you grab onto it, you can apply way more tension than if you're just trying to hold it with your fingers. And you can do it by yourself. You don't need someone to hold the spool with a screwdriver or something like that. Now, if you grip onto your rod really tightly, about 4 inches below your stripper guide, and you start to wind the line on, and then you can perfectly control tension as you're winding your line on. Now, choose a comfortable pace. You don't want to go too quick, otherwise the braid will cut through the wipe and also probably cut your fingers too, which I've done a few times. Now, to check and make sure you've got enough tension, if you run your finger over the line shouldn't move. Also, if you push into the line, you shouldn't be able to dig into the line. It should feel nice and tight. So that's how you make sure you're definitely using enough tension so you don't end up with any wind knots. So you want to spool your reel right until you get to the edge of the spool, which is basically where the flat part ends and the spool starts to curve. And you want to stop there. You don't want to go past where the curve starts. Otherwise, you'll over spool your reel and you'll get way more tangles when you're casting. And that is how you properly spool a reel with braid, especially if you're on your own. You don't need anyone to hold it for you, as long as you do it the way we just did it now. Now, if you're spooling your reel with mono, or if you're spooling your reel with braid, but your spool isn't braid ready and you have to use a mono backing, you use the same knot to attach the mono to your actual spool. You want to start by folding your line to create a loop, and then you pinch your line, create another loop with the tag, like so. Hold the top of that loop in line with your main line, and then you want to wrap the tag around both lines 3 or 4 times, like this. Pull on the tag to form the knot. Then you want to pass the line through the stripper guide or the guide that's closest to your actual reel. Make sure you open the bail arm, and then you want to wrap the loop around the spool just 2 to 3 times, because mono has no problem gripping to any surface. So regardless of your spool being braid ready or not, when you're attaching your mono to it, you only need to wrap it 2 or 3 times. Then you pull on your main line to set the knot, like so. Now you just cut your tag end like this. Now that you've attached your mono, if you're going to be spooling braid because your spool's not braid ready, you only need about 2 meters. So you just cut your line and then just use a line to line knot, and then you spool it on just like we did when we done the other reel with braid. But if you're going to be spooling the actual reel with mono, you just close the bail arm, make sure that the line's running under the roller bearing. Now to apply the right amount of tension, you just hold the line with your fingers. It needs to be tight enough so that the line is tensioned, but not so tight that it burns your fingers when it's passing through them. Now, when spooling mono lines, the main thing you need to make sure that you're doing correctly is you need to make sure the line is coming off the spool counterclockwise. Otherwise, you'll get a lot of unnecessary line twist in your line when you're putting it on your reel. And then just a matter of winding the line on at a consistent pace so it doesn't burn your fingers as the line passes through them. Now with mono, to make sure you've got the right tension when you're spooling, you just run your finger over the line and the line shouldn't really move, and you shouldn't be able to dig your finger into the mono either. It should feel nice and hard, just like it does when you're spooling braid. And then you just continue spooling right until you get to the edge of the spool. Now, once you reach the edge of the spool, where the spool starts to curve off, you want to make sure you stop so you don't over spool the actual reel. And then that's pretty much your mono done. Much more simple than it is to spool braid. And now we've covered spooling both braid and mono on your own with the peace of mind that you've spooled your reels properly and you should not have any issues at all. I hope you guys found this video helpful, and I'll catch you in the next one.